notice and the newspaper publication, and that costs you that much.
250 wouldn't cover a notice requirement, would it?
So if we went and wanted to continue to call it a conditional use, but it's a special one for, I don't know what we're calling them, vendors? I don't know what we're calling it, permanent vendors, then we'd be subsidizing in order to accommodate the uniqueness of the small business that isn't building a building or meeting building codes, whatever, to encourage that in lively atmosphere wherever they set up.
So that's what I thought, and that's why I brought it up, is
Right.
because, so Chuck and I were here when we put that temporary variance, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah,
I guess,
the temporary
temporary
vendor.
vendor thing in place. And the thought process behind all that stuff was the cost recovery on the fee is that, okay, you know, and this is especially during, you know, you think 3.5 years ago, what kind of financial situation was the city in? So we were all very hesitant to do anything that was going to cost the city more money. So it was very, this isn't a public service, so we need to recover costs in some way, and that was the best way that they could come up with there. The desire was to regulate things such as the Saturday market, or not to, the reason it's 6 months is to not prohibit things like the Saturday market from being set up and things along those lines. Christmas trees, fireworks displays, all of those things. And the biggest concerns or dissenters was the slippery slope that you walk. Once you let in, you know, one, how far does it slide to where you end up with, you know, not that this would be you guys in any case, but, you know, gypsy wagons with rugs hanging off and, you know, and temporary.
Guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's where it was, that was probably the biggest discussion and arguments, or, you know, not really arguments, but concerns were focused on how do you regulate it to where it stays with the intent of all the investment we're putting into the city, and now it doesn't look like you have a, you know, a trailer park of rug doctors outside down, you know, just between here and Wild Hare. And so that was kind of the concerns with regards to all that stuff. And that's how we came to the cost. That's how the focus was 6 months, because the Saturday market was about this big. You could get 190-day plus an extra permit, all those kinds of
I
things.
can't remember, just kind of went out of my mind, but a temporary vendor permit is probably only $50 or $100
Mhm.
because it's not a public hearing, it's administrative approval,
Right.
as long as they meet the design guidelines that are in there for temporary vendors, which are very few. It's things like provide a trash can, tell us with a site plan where you're going to set up so that you don't impact circulation of the parking lot, and those kind of things, and tell us how you're getting electricity and make sure it's approved, and that the fire marshal has checked out your operation and doesn't declare it a fire hazard.
I think we should set up some, like I used the term rubric before, but that's probably not descriptive enough. Some structure to allow these things in a more streamlined process and a full conditional use permit. I think that's definitely necessary. But what I'm thinking of is doing some sort of classifications, like we've got some samples here, and we dealt with this when I was down in Hubbard. There's a difference between, you know, for instance, the kind of RV you see on page, or bus, so the actual bus that you see on page 2, and an RV you see on page 4 that's been converted to, you know, kind of a lunch service thing that you see frequently in downtown Portland, and then, you know, a coffee cart or a cupcake cart that's a trailer. I think there's a difference between something that has its own engine, can drive away every day, something that's maybe a trailer that would be probably parked for a longer period of time, versus something like a couple of these pictures appear to be some version of a manufactured home that's been set on the ground of some sort. You know, there's different types to these and different sort of ways that people create them that we would want to categorize and possibly treat differently.
Well, could there be maybe a tier to it?
That's
what I'm saying.
yeah.
You know, leave the temporary one the way that it is, and make it another level to it is the better way to go, I think, because that's going to allow them to do what they need to do and get into the city and bring more commerce there, and not have to step up that next level.
That's what I'm thinking.
I would just say the concern from my perspective, it would be like the same concern we had 3 years from now. It's almost never the first person, first group you
Right.
bring in. It's not the first 5. Those ones are the good citizens. Hey, everyone loves them. It's the 6th, 7th, 8th one that found that, well, you know, you set a precedent. Why can't I get in? And that's the concern, as to how do you regulate that? And that's where a lot of work would be put in, I think would have to be put in place for it to be able to be put in place.
Yeah. I agree. I think staff would have their work cut out for
Well,
them.
it is a very difficult area, and that's why I mentioned the fact, talking to the planning director, that, you know, it sounds like a fairly simple thing. It's just a little cart. They've been studying it for 1.5 years in the community. They've gone through all these alternative paper presentations, and the council is still debating back and forth, is this a good thing for the community or not? And in reality, I think most of it comes down to appearance, because you're not building a permanent structure that meets either building codes and/or Canby's design guidelines. We have design guidelines that we adopted up and down the entire highway and all of the downtown. Is there a way that they can meet some aspect of those design guidelines? Like, should their paint match the building that they're setting outside of?
Right.
Or something?
Right.
Or do you want them to stripe it so that it has a stripe that's the same color as where they're sitting or something?
And I would expect there would be some objection to the fixed structure restaurants, because obviously it's competition. Nobody's real thrilled about having competition, but I mean, I don't think that should enter really into our mind.
No,
Right.
those weren't issues that we had, because I mean, that's out of, once again, that kind of gets out of the purview of us to worry about the
Yeah.
economics associated with it. It was the site and design, how's it look, how's it gonna plan with the city, and things along those lines.
And, you know, Renata is indicating that if it's at least in the downtown area, then the Main Street can participate, and the design committee could be an initial screening as to whether they think it's appropriate for the appearance that we're trying to achieve for downtown. But I think this goes further and would be allowed in other commercial zones as well.
Right, are you saying that, because it is mentioned about the fee of, was it $2,000, somewhere around in there? And wanting to reduce it to $250, and I'm just, I have an appreciation for what it costs for, you know, for staff time and going through that approval process. But above and beyond that, I'm concerned that, you know, we're not, going back to what we talked about just with the library, giving special consideration if somebody came in and wanted to open a restaurant in the old Graham Stationery Building. We would not be reducing fees for them just because
They're a small business.
because they're a small business. I have no objections to food carts at all. I work in Portland every day, so they're all over the place down there, and I patronize them and things like that. So that part doesn't bother me, but it does bother me a little bit that we are going to apply a different fee structure. But that, I don't think that's in our purview.
Oh, sure, it absolutely.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Then-
What type of application is definitely.
Okay.
If we change the whole rubric for a classification, variance has a different fee. I don't know what, I don't know that for a fact it's different, but a variance probably has a different fee than a conditional use permit, which probably has a different fee than whatever else.
So one of
So-
the thought processes was that if, it does make me nervous if we're gonna call it a conditional use permit, that we have a different fee. That makes me nervous. But what we wanted to do, but we don't have to, was I feel uneasy judging these unless we develop some design standards with your help, that I didn't want to make the decision myself. I wanted you guys to make it.
Why couldn't we say something to the effect, just change the definition of permitted uses in the relevant zones? Just say that such and such and such is permitted in this zone as long as it complies with the following criteria. A trailer must comply with no more than one sign, and, you know, this, and it must, you know, this, and it's subject to review every 3 years for aesthetic, design, and a fixed structure that's just setting on the ground, is has to comply with this.
So that process, I can't remember what the name of it is from a zoning standpoint now, but rather than a conditional use permit that requires a public hearing and notification of neighbors, you could simply have a use that's allowed per standards that you were identifying, and theoretically, to make it less cost, staff could review that administratively, like we do the temporary vendor ordinance.
Yep.
You guys don't see those.
If you do a conditional use permit for a temporary cart vendor, every time you do one, you'll have an audience room full of people, especially the people who have issues. If it's a Chinese restaurant, I probably know of a couple restaurants that will have an Asian food that they'll be in here complaining about it, or things along those lines. I mean, that's just gonna be, it's competition. You're bringing competition in. They're gonna, if they have a way to fight it, they're gonna fight it.
That's why I think if we establish it'll take some thought and some effort behind it, but some criteria that say, if you conform to this, this, and this, you're approved. If you want to go outside of that, you got to do a conditional use permit, a variance of some sort, and then you really got to pay,
And
or
human
else.
fee structures.
Yeah.
And the underlying zoning district, I don't think we probably need to or want to go to changing what uses are allowed there. In other words, most likely these are going to be retail businesses. And so they need to go where we allow permanent retail businesses. And I think they'll be perfectly happy with that. Just as Renata said, they couldn't set up an Aurora in a residential neighborhood. They couldn't do that here either. The other thing that Renata and I talked about, and that you guys have implied, that in Portland, what's kind of makes them neat is they're grouped. And when you get a group of them, then they make a statement. And it really does build up that tourism and gathering and vitality of the downtown area, et cetera. But we don't know how we would get to a location where they would end up being multiple, because we're still talking on private property. And we can't imagine the city at this stage in trying to get involved in buying a piece of property to promote food carts in a grouping.
Good luck.
Yeah. And so,
That's true.
so I think what you're going to end up seeing in reality is, if any more than the one that's approached us now do come, because we developed the process, they're likely to be wherever there's another business owner that has a place on his property where he could fit them in without taking up a required parking space and blocking a handicapped accessible sidewalk, or decreasing his required landscaping. So there's 3 conditions that we could place on it right now. You can't do any of those. That's what we did with the temporary vendor. We said the same thing. You can't take up a required parking space.
Right.
You can't block handicap. And so we can try to come up with those.
Is there consensus to, I think we need at least 3 of us to direct staff to try and come up with some definitions that would allow them to be permitted uses in the underlying zones, that
I
with some
might also add
criteria that
that
makes sense.
the fire marshal came by and gave me this one sheet that he gives, and he actually passes this around to fireworks stand operators as well. But he says it could equally apply to this. And so as long as they're meeting these inspection lists that the fire department has, they're okay with a permanent vendor.
I would say yes, we probably need to go down that route. I would just be very, very, very deliberate with what you're doing, as we saw with the transportation plan discussions that occurred, and the few other discussions that occurred. The desire to even have put in the library was a contentious issue that had a lot of people going back and forth. And that's what I'm saying is, we need to, if we go down this road, we need to be very deliberate and very open as to what we're talking about, because a lot of people, they get food cart stuck, or they get cart in their head and they're seeing gypsy wagons with rugs hanging off of them, not classy looking establishments that produce something and are viable for the economy and the locals.
Bad time.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is if we go down that road, it needs to be very open, very deliberate, especially the folks in the downtown need to be drawn and dragged into that conversation, as I don't think they were initially with the transportation study. They were invited, but they didn't realize that they should have been dragged, which
They were invited, but
then resulted in hours and hours and hours of Chuck and I sitting in here, so.
So I'm not really hearing any disagreement. I'm going to propose to staff some guidance here, and I'm going to look at the nodding heads and see if you guys all nod the heads. That we look at some language like that, Brian, with maybe some thought put into maybe time limits, design standards, the different types of structural and mechanical thing they're using, and then the costs for the application or non if we do it as some sort of a permitted use. And then maybe as backup to that, anything outside of that realm then goes to our normal process for conditional use. Does that cover all the sort of major things we were thinking of?
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
Okay.
Looks like
And that
somebody
we
has
do
something
want
to
to have this kind of thing. Let's get some protections in place that fit sort of what we established being desire of the community.
And she looks like she wants to
Oh,
talk.
yeah, John. Anything you want to add?
I just want to say, being a citizen of Canby, I'm Jeanette Van Tassel, and my husband David, and we'd like to, we're asking for the cart space. It's basically the first mobile processing unit in the state of Oregon, so it would bring media attention to town. You know, we always want to bring people into downtown, because driving down 99, you don't see a lot. We're not looking to be on 99. We're looking to be more in the core. We need the space to make our product, to get it to market. We have people in town that are willing to sell our product, but we can't make it because we don't have a commercial kitchen. And that's the whole thing that's stopping us. And, you know, we've talked to several people. The cart came up as, you know, more reasonably priced to get something to market. We all know how the economy is right now, and it would be beneficial to the city of Canby to bring people in here to purchase more, you know, purchase the product or to get it ready for market. We sell a lot of it to friends and family, and they're all wanting to know when it's going to be in the stores, and you know, we're just asking you guys for some help.
I think I can assure you on behalf of the commission that we want to encourage business to come to Canby. We want people that have businesses to stay in Canby. We want to do everything that we can to make it possible for you to do business in Canby. That said, we also have to think about the larger picture. We can't just say, oh, you're approved today because you're nice people and it's a great idea and all this. We have to kind of think about all this stuff. So please be a little bit patient with us and put in the processes to make this work for people in general. And we'll try and get it done
we appreciate
quickly. If there, I mean, our staff is fantastic on these kinds of things. If something comes up where you're facing a time issue, you know, we can.
Well, the things are in
try
place
and
right now for them
expedite
to have
things.
6 months worth. I mean, it's
So would they fit
financially
under the
tough, but-
current 6-month thing for
Or they-
permit for a temporary food cart, or?
It's theoretically possible that if we're working towards a long-term solution, that they could get started under a temporary vendor permit, and then with the idea, they'd have to vacate and abandon once they reach the 180 days if we didn't have a new ordinance in effect that allowed them after that.
Just a question is if we could have one in place for 100. I mean, it's just a risk you would have to take is a thing. And that's why I was promoting transparency, openness, discussion about it, is because what you don't want is what will happen, what I've seen happen is where people who don't understand fully, they will put a screeching halt to this very quickly.
But with your trailer idea, if that's what you propose, to turn a conventional trailer into the system, 180 days might work for you until there's a permanent long-term solution to make you guys a nice little nest here in Canby somewhere.
Are you Mr. Smoking Salsa?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, it looks like you, yeah.
Okay. Well, then let's close that new business item agenda. Brian, and Angie, do you have enough things to move forward with any of that?
I think so.
Okay. Thanks for your recommendations on that. That was some good stuff. And any other items or reports from staff? Yes. Oh, do we have that to sign? I can do that right while we're at it. Penny, did you print that? I can sign that whenever you.
He's got his notes there.
Let me print that.
Do you have the signature page?
Oh, yeah, I've got this one. Make sure I've got the right one on. To deny, this is to approve. There's the denial one. Pretty good shape.
It's fancy paper.
It is. I noticed that. It must have been stuck in the printer.
Today's June. What's the attesting line on this for?
That's for me.
Okay. Any other staff topics? Notes, comments?
We still need to, or did you?
Did you?
You got it, okay.
Okay. What do you have?
Nothing?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any planning commission topics, items of interest?
Oh, I did have one item,
Okay.
just in case you hadn't heard. We did get a remand on the Fred Meyer fuel station from Luba.
Oh.
And so it was remanded back to the city. I forget the terminology. It's been too long since I read it now. What do they call them? Heirs or something? I can't remember what they call them. It's legal language. Anyhow, there were four contentious
Well,
issues.
assignments of error.
Yeah, assignments of error, that's what it was. And so we were remanded back on number 1 and number 4, and number 1 was the primary one, and it was that basically the transportation planning rule wasn't either performed or there wasn't adequate findings as to why you truly didn't need to do one. Something to that effect. So at this point, I don't really know what the process is. I don't know anything about responding to a LUBA remand at all. I just have read it now. And so I'm anticipating that we'll get some assistance from the Fred Meyer attorneys in trying to respond back. And so I'm
Okay.
waiting to hear from them. And the other item that they had trouble with, there wasn't adequate findings in the report regarding the crosswalk that was identified in the adopted TSP that would be
By Holbert's?
in the general block. The TSP didn't say where it would go, just in the block. And so there was some discussion about it going at Locust Street where this filling station was to go. And the discussion and agreement by condition was if the crosswalk was ever constructed, they would reconfigure their driveway to a right turnout only. Well, apparently that wasn't adequate, according to LUBA, and that there needed to be more discussion and findings since a condition of one of the criteria was that you make findings in accordance with your comprehensive plan, which includes your adopted TSP, which said there was going to be a crosswalk. And so there wasn't adequate findings again, dealing with the crosswalk. So,
All right. Well, that reiterates the point. I mean, on complex ones like that, or even more simple ones, we've got to make sure we discuss and, talk about and make findings as to the things that they talk about. Whether it's point by point, or particularly with regards to our code. I don't remember on that if they had suggested that we needed findings on any of that stuff, but they were lawyered up to the hilt.
Yep.
Okay. Any other commission items of interest? Is there a motion to adjourn?
We didn't have minutes.
Did
Oh,
minutes.
minutes. Where was
We
that?
missed the minutes.
Number 6.
It slipped
Oh,
by.
skipped over
Sorry,
minutes.
Ben.
Sorry, I did. Thank you,
Too
Mr.
excited.
Okay, we have minutes. Is there motion to approve the minutes or a motion to amend the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented for May the 28th, 2013.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
Okay, motion and second. Is there any discussion on these minutes? Not hearing any discussion, we'll move to the vote.
Oh, did you want?
No, I said question.
Oh. All those in favor of adopting these minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, the minutes are approved. Do we have a seventh planning commissioner yet?
No, haven't heard a word about
Okay,
it.
all right. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.